Margaret Chen sat at the head of a dining table, her fingers wrapped around the stem of a wine glass she hadn't yet sipped from. The chandelier above cast a warm glow over the carefully arranged place settings, the bone china she'd inherited from her own mother, the silver candlesticks that had witnessed 40 years of family dinners. Tonight should have been a celebration, but something felt different. Something felt wrong. Her son Daniel sat to her right, his hand occasionally reaching over to squeeze the fingers of the young woman beside him. Amélie Roussel, the fiancée. Daniel's eyes held that particular shine they got when he was truly happy, a glow Margaret hadn't seen since before his father passed away 3 years ago. For that alone, she wanted to love Amélie. "Mom, this roast is incredible," Daniel said, cutting into the tender beef. "You've outdone yourself." "Thank you, sweetheart," Margaret replied, allowing herself a small smile. She'd spent the entire day preparing this dinner, wanting everything to be perfect for what was meant to be a special evening, getting to know the woman her only son planned to marry. Amélie sat across from her, impeccably dressed in a cream silk blouse that probably cost more than Margaret's entire outfit. Her dark hair was pulled back in an elegant chignon, and her makeup was flawless. She was beautiful, undeniably so, with the kind of refined features that belonged in a fashion magazine. At 28, she was 6 years younger than Daniel, a corporate attorney at a prestigious firm in the city. "It's quite good," Amélie said, her French accent wrapping around the English words like velvet. "Though perhaps a touch overcooked. In France, we prefer our beef more. How do you say? Tender?" Margaret felt the criticism land like a small stone in still water, creating ripples she tried to ignore. "I'm glad you're enjoying it," she said evenly. Daniel cleared his throat. "So, Mom, I was thinking maybe we could have the wedding, hey? In the garden, like you and Dad did. Amélie thinks it's a wonderful idea, don't you, honey?" Amélie's smile was perfectly practiced. "Of course, though we would need to bring in proper landscapers. The garden is very rustic." "Rustic," Margaret repeated softly. She'd spent 20 years cultivating that garden, nurturing each rose bush, each hydrangea, each climbing vine with her own hands. "Rustic." The conversation drifted to wedding plans, venues, guest lists. Margaret mostly listened, noting how Amélie's vision involved ice sculptures, a string quartet, and a guest list of 300. Daniel, her practical, down-to-earth Daniel, simply nodded along, occasionally glancing at his mother as if seeking approval he wasn't quite sure how to ask for. "Would you like more wine, Amélie?" Margaret asked, lifting the bottle of Bordeaux she'd splurged on for the occasion. "Non, merci," Amélie said, then added in rapid French to Daniel, "Si vin est mediocre. J'ai bu mieux dans les station service." "This wine is mediocre. I've had better at gas stations." She laughed lightly, and Daniel chuckled too, though his French was clearly limited to basic phrases. He had no idea what she'd actually said. But Margaret did. She'd spent 2 years in Paris in her 20s, before she met Robert, before Daniel, before the life that had led her to this moment. She'd waitressed at a cafe in the Marais, fallen in love with a painter who broke her heart, and learned to speak French fluently enough to dream in it. That was a lifetime ago, a version of herself she rarely spoke about. Daniel knew she'd traveled in her youth, but the details had never seemed important enough to share. Margaret carefully set down the wine bottle, her hand steady despite the heat rising in her chest. She said nothing. "Not yet. Mom, you okay?" Daniel asked, noticing her silence. "Fine, dear. Just listening to you two talk about your future. It's wonderful to see you so happy." Amélie's phone buzzed, and she glanced at it with barely concealed excitement. "Oh, my mother sent photos of wedding dresses from Paris." "Daniel, look." She angled the phone toward him, scrolling through images of elaborate gowns that probably cost more than a small car. "They are beautiful," Daniel said dutifully. "Bien sûr tu es le sant. Contrairement à cette robe épouvantable tu es porte," Amélie muttered under her breath, gesturing subtly toward Margaret with her phone. "Of course they are. Unlike that dreadful dress she's wearing." Margaret glanced down at her navy dress, a simple A-line she'd bought on sale at Nordstrom Rack. It was clean, pressed, appropriate. Apparently, it was all so dreadful. She stood up. I'll get dessert. I made crème brûlée. How ambitious, Amélie said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Then, in French, to Daniel, elle est tellement forte. C'est presque pathétique. She tries so hard. It's almost pathetic. In the kitchen, Margaret gripped the edge of the counter, her knuckles white. She closed her eyes and took 3 deep breaths, the way her therapist had taught her after Robert died. In through the nose, out through the mouth. Don't react. Think. She'd known, of course, that not every future daughter-in-law would be an easy fit. She prepared herself for differences in taste, in style, in personality. But this calculated cruelty, this assumption that she was too simple, too provincial, too ignorant to understand. The crème brûlées sat in the refrigerator, their sugar tops perfectly caramelized. She'd used her kitchen torch carefully, getting each one just right. She arranged them on a tray with fresh berries and mint leaves, making them as beautiful as she knew how. When she returned to the dining room, the conversation had shifted to Amélie's family in Lyon. My father owns 3 restaurants, Amélie was saying. Very high-end, Michelin-starred. He's quite respected in the culinary world. That's impressive, Margaret said, setting down the desserts. No wonder you have such refined tastes. Oh, elle n'a aucune idée, Amélie said with a little laugh. Oh, she has no idea. Cette pauvre femme pense probablement que Michelin vend seulement des news. This poor woman probably thinks Michelin only sells tires. Daniel laughed at whatever he thought she'd said, and Margaret felt something inside her shift. Not quite break. Harden, perhaps. This looks amazing, Mom, Daniel said, cracking into his crème brûlée with his spoon. Amélie took a delicate bite, then set down her spoon. It's possible. The sugar is slightly burned. I thought that was the point of crème brûlée, Daniel said, confused. There's burned, and then there's brûlée, Amélie said condescendingly. Elle ne connaît pas la différence. She doesn't know the difference. Comment pouvait-elle savoir? Elle vient probablement d'un milieu très simple. How could she? She probably comes from a very simple background. Margaret took a bite of her dessert. The custard was silky, the sugar top perfectly caramelized with just the right amount of bitter contrast to the sweet cream. It was, objectively, a very good crème brûlée. She'd made thousands of them over the years, had served them at dinner parties that left guests begging for the recipe. Tell me about Lyon, Amélie, Margaret said pleasantly. I've heard it's beautiful. Oh, it's exquisite. The architecture, the food, the culture, it's everything that. She waved her hand vaguely. Well, it's very European, very refined. Not like suburban New Jersey, you mean? Margaret said. Exactly. Amélie smiled. Si serait comique si n'était pas si triste. Cette petite maison, si petit dîner, cette petite vie. It would be comical if it weren't so sad. This little house, this little dinner, this little life. Mais Daniel de l'argent maintenant, grâce à moi. Now Alan's sorted a set mediocrite. But Daniel has money now, thanks to me. We're going to get out of this mediocrity. Margaret's spoon clinked against her dessert bowl, the sound sharp in the sudden silence that had fallen over her. Thanks to her, Daniel was a successful architect who'd built his career from nothing, working his way through night school while supporting himself. He had money because he'd earned it, long before Amélie entered the picture. So, the wedding, Margaret said, her voice calm. Daniel mentioned you wanted to have it in the garden. Well, as I said, with extensive renovations. Des renovations, Margaret said in perfect French, OU1 transformation complete. Renovations, or a complete transformation. The room went silent. Amélie's fork stopped halfway to her mouth. Daniel's eyes widened. Parce que, voyez vows, Margaret continued, leaning back in her chair. J'ai passé deux ans à Paris dans ma jeunesse. J'ai vécu dans one chambre de bonne au 6e étage sans ascenseur dans le 11e arrondissement. J'ai appris le français en servant des expressos à des artistes arrogants à des touristes impolis. Because, you see, I spent 2 years in Paris in my youth. I lived in a maid's room on the 6th floor with no elevator in the 11th arrondissement. I learned French, serving espressos to arrogant artists and rude tourists. Amélie had gone pale, her carefully applied foundation suddenly looking like a mask. At Pendant C Diner, Margaret said, her voice still pleasant but with an edge of steel underneath, J'ai compris chaque mot que vous avez dit. Chaque. Saul. Mot. And during this dinner, I understood every word you said. Every single word. Mom. Daniel looked between them, confused and alarmed. What's going on? Margaret switched back to English, her eyes never leaving Amélie's face. Your fiancé has spent the evening insulting me, my home, my cooking, and my life. In French, because she assumed I wouldn't understand. What? Amélie. Daniel turned to her, his expression a mixture of shock and disbelief. I didn't. Amélie stammered, the smoothness gone from her voice. You said my wine was mediocre, something you'd find at a gas station, Margaret continued, her voice steady. You called my dress dreadful. You said I try so hard it's pathetic. You mocked the idea that I would understand what a Michelin star means. You called my home, my dinner, and my life little and mediocre. And you told my son that you're going to help him escape this mediocrity. Each accusation landed like a physical blow. Amélie's face had gone from pale to flushed, splotches of red appearing on her neck. Is this true? Daniel's voice was quiet, dangerous in its stillness. It was just. I didn't mean. Vous ne pensiez pas que je comprendrais, Margaret said. You didn't think I would understand. C'est different à ne pas avoir voulu dire ce que vous avez dit. That's different from not meaning what you said. Mom, I don't understand what's happening, Daniel said, his voice rising. Someone explain to me what the hell is going on. Margaret reached across the table and took her son's hand. Amélie has been speaking French all evening, making cruel comments about me. She called your childhood home little, called me pathetic, mocked my cooking, and suggested that I'm too simple to understand refined culture. She also implied that your success is somehow because of her, and that you both need to escape the mediocrity of this life. Daniel pulled his hand from Amélie's as if she'd burned him. Tell me my mother is lying. Amélie's mouth opened and closed. Her eyes darted between them, calculating, trying to find an angle. Finally, she seemed to settle on indignation. You don't understand. This is taken out of context. In French, things sound different. I understand French perfectly, Margaret interrupted. And there's no context in which what you said is acceptable. You tricked me. Amélie said, her accent thickening with emotion. You let me think. I let you think nothing, Margaret said coldly. You assumed. You assumed I was some simple suburban housewife who couldn't possibly have lived another life before this one. You assumed my kindness was ignorance. You assumed my son came from nothing worth respecting. Those were your assumptions, not my deceptions. Daniel stood up, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor. I think you need to leave, Amélie. What? Daniel. No, you don't understand. I understand perfectly. His voice was shaking, and Margaret could see tears in his eyes. I understand that the woman I was planning to marry just spent an entire evening disrespecting my mother in a way she thought would go unnoticed. I understand that you think so little of where I come from, of the woman who raised me, that you felt comfortable mocking her to her face. But I love you. Love. Daniel laughed bitterly. You just called my entire life mediocre. My home, my mother, everything I built before I met you. And you know what the worst part is? You weren't even angry. You were just casually cruel, like it was nothing to you. Amélie stood up, grabbing her purse. Fine, fine. You want to throw away what we have over this. Over her. She gestured toward Margaret. Your mother living in her little house with her little life, pretending she's happy. Get out, Daniel said, his voice deadly quiet. You'll regret this, Amélie hissed. When you're still stuck here in 10 years, you'll regret choosing her over me. The only thing I regret, Daniel said, is not seeing who you really were sooner. The engagement is off. Leave your ring on the table on your way out. For a moment, Amélie looked like she might argue further. Then, with shaking hands, she twisted the diamond ring off her finger and threw it onto the table, where it bounced once before settling beside the crème brûlée dishes. She grabbed her coat and stormed toward the door. Before she left, she turned back one final time. Vous avez gâché votre seule chance d'avoir quelque chose de mieux, she spat at Daniel. You've ruined your only chance at something better. At Vous, she said to Margaret. Vous êtes exactement aussi petite que je le pensais. And you are exactly as small as I thought. Non, Margaret said quietly, standing up. Je suis exactement aussi forte que vous avez refusé de voir. No, I am exactly as strong as you refuse to see. Et mon fils mérite quelqu'un qui peut voir la valeur de l'amour audacieux de l'argent, de l'authenticité audacieux du statut, et de la gentillesse audacieux de la cruauté. And my son deserves someone who can see the value of love over money, authenticity over status, and kindness over cruelty. The door slammed, and then it was just Margaret and Daniel in the dining room, the remains of their ruined celebration dinner spread before them. Daniel sank back into his chair, his head in his hands. I'm so sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry. Margaret moved around the table and put her arms around her son, the way she'd done when he was little and came home with scraped knees or hurt feelings. He was 34 years old, 6 feet tall, and successful beyond anything she'd dared dream for him when he was born. But right now, he was just her boy, and he was hurting. You have nothing to apologize for, she said softly. I brought her into your home. I was going to marry her. I didn't see. How could you? Margaret said. She hid who she was. She showed you one face and me another. That's not your fault. You spent all day cooking, Daniel said, his voice muffled against her shoulder. You made everything perfect, and she... Sure, Margaret soothed. It's over now. They stood like that for a long moment, the chandelier casting gentle shadows around them. Finally, Daniel pulled back, wiping his eyes. You lived in Paris, he asked, a watery smile breaking through. You never told me that. It was a long time ago, Margaret said. Before your father, before you. I was young and stupid and thought I could be a writer. Turns out I was better at pouring coffee than stringing sentences together. Tell me about it, Daniel said. Please, I want to hear everything. So Margaret made coffee, real coffee, the French press she rarely used, and they moved to the living room. She told him about the narrow streets of Paris, about the painter named Michel who taught her about light and shadow and heartbreak. She told him about learning to speak French by eavesdropping on conversations, about her terrible 6th-floor apartment that was always too hot in summer and too cold in winter, about coming home when her mother got sick and meeting Robert at the hospital where they were both visiting family. Dad knew all this. Daniel asked. Of course. Your father knew everything about me. The good, the bad, the dreams I gave up and the ones I found instead. I thought I knew Amélie, Daniel said quietly. We've been together for a year. How did I not see who she really was? Because she's very good at pretending, Margaret said. And because you wanted to believe the best in her. That's not a weakness, Daniel. That's one of the things I love most about you. You see the good in people. Even when it's not there, he said bitterly. Sometimes it takes time to show itself. And sometimes... She paused. Sometimes people show you who they are, and you have to believe them. Daniel picked up the ring from where it still sat on the dining table, turning it over in his fingers. I was going to spend my life with her. I know. I was going to have children with her. I know. And the whole time, she was looking down on us. On you. On everything I came from. Margaret took the ring from him and set it aside. But you didn't know that. You saw someone beautiful and successful and confident. Someone who made you feel good about yourself. There's nothing wrong with that. Except she didn't actually make me feel good about myself, Daniel said slowly, as if realizing it for the first time. Not really. I always felt like I was trying to keep up, trying to be good enough for her friends, her family, her world. And now, Daniel looked around the living room, at the worn but comfortable furniture, The photos on the walls chronicling his life from baby pictures to graduation to his first building design. Now I feel like I've been pretending to be someone I'm not. You're a good man, Daniel Chen, Margaret said firmly. You're successful because you worked hard. You're kind because I raised you right and because your father showed you how to be. You don't need someone who wants to change you or save you from your mediocre life. You need someone who sees that what you've built is already extraordinary. Daniel hugged her again, fierce and tight. I love you, Mom. I love you too, sweetheart. Later, after Daniel had left, promising to call her in the morning, to not be alone tonight, to not make any rash decisions, Margaret cleaned up the dinner dishes. She scraped the barely touched food into containers, washed the bone china carefully, put away the silver. The rings still sat on the sideboard, glinting in the light. She'd give it to Daniel later. Whatever he wanted to do with it was his business. She poured herself a glass of the mediocre wine and sat in her garden, in the rustic space she'd cultivated with her own hands. The roses were in bloom, their scent heavy in the evening air. The hydrangeas glowed white in the darkness. Somewhere, a cricket chirped. Margaret sipped her wine. It was actually quite good. A nice Bordeaux with hints of blackberry and oak. Not mediocre at all. She thought about Paris, about the girl she'd been who waitressed and wrote bad poetry and fell in love with the wrong man. She thought about coming home, about meeting Robert, about building a life that, yes, was simple, suburban, rustic, even, but it was also good. It was filled with love and laughter and 40 years of memories. It was Daniel learning to ride a bike on this driveway, Daniel playing basketball in this yard, Daniel bringing home his first girlfriend to meet her at this dining table. It was book clubs and garden parties and quiet evenings with Robert before he got sick. It was life, real and full and imperfect. Nothing little about it. Nothing mediocre about it at all. Margaret raised her glass to the stars. A la vie, she whispered. To life. Et à la vérité. And to truth. Somewhere in the city, Amélie Rousseau was probably on her phone, calling friends, rewriting the story to make herself the victim. Let her. Margaret had spent enough of her evening dealing with that woman's cruelty. Tomorrow, Daniel would start healing. There would be phone calls to make, wedding deposits to cancel, explanations to give to friends and family. Margaret would help him through all of it, the way she'd helped him through every difficulty in his life. But tonight, she sat in her garden, drinking her perfectly good wine, and felt something she hadn't felt in years. Not since Paris. Not since she was young. Proud. Proud of who she'd been, who she'd become, and who she'd raised her son to be. Inside the house, her phone buzzed. A text from Daniel. Thank you for being exactly who you are. I'm sorry I ever brought someone into your life who couldn't see how amazing that is. Love you forever. Margaret smiled, typing back. Love you more than life, mon chéri. Always have, always will. She set down her phone and looked up at the stars again. Somewhere out there was a woman who would love Daniel for exactly who he was, who would sit at this table and appreciate the care that went into every meal, who would see this garden and understand the years of love it represented. And when that woman arrived, Margaret would welcome her with open arms. But she'd probably skip the French wine.